Evening, everyone. Sorry for the last minute cancellation of this week's Zera Shimshon after Purim. We had to, due to a mitzvah opportunity that's coming up on Thursday night, I will have to do this one remotely, even though I really was supposed to do it in person. But let's start with Parshat Vayakhel. We are going to do first Jerush number 9, Jerush Tet, in Parshat Vayakhel. That will be the first one we'll do, and hopefully we'll get to do another one as well. So it says, Bidrash Rabbah, the Zera Shimshon says that during this Parshat Vayakhel, as we know, is the beginning of the summary of the building of the Mishkan. And the Midrash Rabbah says on the pasuk Vayas Kol Chacham Lev, and it says Hadaud Ichtiv Mayim Rabim Lo Yuchlu Lechavot Et Ahava Mayim Rabim Elu Umot Haolam Kedichtiv Kahamot Yamim Yehamayun Im Mitkansim Kol Umot Uvatel Et Ahava Sheyesh Ben HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael Inam Yicholim Dichtiv Mayim Rabim Uchtiv V'Ohav Et Yaakov Naharot U'Ishtefua Elu HaMalchuyot V'chein HaKatuv Omer Et Mei HaNahar Et Melech HaShur Ad Kalishnu. So the Zera Shimshon starts his drush by quoting the Midrash Rabbah on the pasuk Vayasu Kol Chacham Lev, and it says that Hadaud Ichtiv Mayim Rabim Lo Yichlu Lechavot Et Ahava. The meaning of what is written in the pasuk in Shir Hashim, that many waters Mayim Rabim can extinguish the love, and the rivers can't wash away the love that Hashem has between Bnei Israel and Hashem. So it says Mayim Rabim Elu Amat. Who are the Mayim Rabim? Who are they referring to? They're referring to the rest of the nations of the world. Kidichtiv Kamon Yamim Yemayun, as written in another pasuk in Yeshayahu, it says that the strong waters of the ocean. Those are referring to the nations of the world. So obviously the Mayim Rabim from the pasuk in Shir Hashim, which the Midrash started with, is referring to the many nations. Imit Kasim Kol Almot Vatel Ta'ava Sheish Ben HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael. Even if all the nations of the world assemble to somehow to abolish the love between Bnei Israel and Hashem, they can't. Why? Because it says Dichtiv Mayim Rabim, even lots of waters, as a pasuk in Shir Hashim says, even great amounts of water, they won't be able to. Even the great nations, even if they're as strong as the great waters, they won't be able to extinguish the love. Dichtiv Va'ohavet Yaakov, and the love that is mentioned is referred to in another pasuk in Malachi that says, I love Yaakov, and the Shir Hashirim, the Midrash continues by quoting the rest of the pasuk of Shir Hashirim, and it says, and it says that rivers cannot wash away. These are the Malchuyot. These are referring to the oppressive regime. So you have the nations of the world, and you have the regimes that are second level. Another pasuk to support that Naharot are referring to these rivers are referring to the regimes. So there, in that case, it's a pasuk that says Meinahar Melech Ashur, right? So the abundant waters of the river, the king of Ashur. So the second pasuk is kind of also supporting that idea that Naharot is referring to regimes, and the first pasuk, which was Mayim Rabim Lo Yichlu, is Mayim Rabim was supported by a pasuk Kamot Yamim Yehamayun. Therefore, so we have what the Midrash was so far started with is Mayim Rabim Lo Yichlu Lechavot Et Ahava. So that is referring to the love between Hashem and Bnei Israel. And even if there are Mayim Rabim, if there are great waters, and the Midrash says that these great waters are referring to great nations, right? Idolatrous nations of the world, as well as the Naharot, the rivers, which are obviously less than a great water or an ocean, if you will. Then these rivers are referring to regimes. So that's the Midrash so far. Now the Zera Shimshon asks two questions on the Midrash. He says, right? How could we even think about the fact right? How could we think that the nations of the world would be able to abolish the love that Hashem has for Jewish people? Love is a non-physical thing. It's something that is it's a spiritual thing, right? It can't be taken away. Right? It is intangible, right? And there's something that exists between two people. It's an intangible love, and love is intangible. Right? I would understand if the Midrash said that if the nations would gather together and they tried to destroy, God forbid, Bnei Israel, then I'd understand. This is what the Zera Shimshon is saying. Nicha Shapir, that I would understand. Shazehu davar shaya yichol be'adam, right? That's something that the nations of the world could actually do because they could destroy the nation of Israel, God forbid, right? But they can't destroy love. Im lo machmat, right? Davar shaya yichol be'adam. Im lo machmat shakadosh baruch hu lo shavek v'lo yishbok, right? If obviously Hashem will never allow that, but at least it's something that's possible, right? In theory, it's possible. The Zera Shimshon says with force. He says, regard to love, love is a non-intangible thing. We can't get rid. It's inconceivable for the nations to even say such a thing, right? So why would the Midrash even make such a comparison? Vote Kasher. And the second difficulty, he says, Masha Amar Neharot Lishtafua Ela Malchayot V'Chia Malchayot Inam Halmot Atzma U'Ma Usif Lanu B'Zeh. Right. The obvious question is, if we're talking about the great nations, why do we have to talk about the regimes afterwards? Right. Once we talk about nations, we're obviously including the regimes. So the Zera Shimshon is bothered by two questions. Question number one is, why would we talk about something intangible like love to be destroyed, right? Talk about the people of Israel potentially being destroyed. Obviously, Hashem never will make that happen, but at least we have something that's tangible. That's question number one. Question two is, if we talk about the greater nations, which is the Mayim Rabim, so we don't have to mention the Neharot, you don't have to mention the rivers because the rivers are regimes that are obviously included in the nations. So Vayesh Lamar, now he starts his answers. Right? Now, you can't abolish, right? While it is not possible to directly abolish the love that one feels for a person, right? It's possible to stop the action that generates the love. Now we're going to get into the point where the Zera Shimshon talks about something, and I think again one of the many things that I enjoy about the Zera Shimshon is his ability to connect points and topics and things that are really, even though it was written, well over 500 years ago, 350 years ago, 350 years ago, he still talks about things that are relevant today, and you'll see why in a second. Even though even the questions themselves are already very relevant to today. So it's not that the love itself is that we can't be destroyed, but that we know is intangible, right? But maybe it's possible. This is what the Zera Shimshon is going to suggest: is that maybe it's possible to destroy that which is the connection between the two. He says, "The love that Hashem has towards Bnei Israel is what is mentioned in the first chapter, the first parak of Brachot, on Daf Chet Amud Aleph. Ohev Hashem Sa'arei Tzion. The Gemara says, quotes a pasuk in Tehillim, and there it says that Hashem loves the gates of Tzion. Ohavei Hashem Sa'arei Mitzuyanim B'Halachai. He says that Hashem loves the gathering places, right? The Batei Mitzuyanim, places that are gathering, the places that are distinguished, right? Or Mitzuyanim means Tziyun means a place that's distinguished or a marker, right? A place that's marked by halacha. Mitzuyanim B'Halacha. And the Zera Shimshon continues, says that in the Yalkut Shimoni it mentions Hakol Kol Yaakov, right? What is the Kol Kol Yaakov? Kol Zaman Shekol Yaakov Nishma Bevatei Knisiyot Bevatei Mishriot Ena Yadayim Yidei Esav Shel Totbo. He says that even the voice. He says that Kol Yaakov is when the voice of Yaakov is heard in the Batei Midrashot and the Batei Knisiyot, right? That's a further support is that the love that Hashem has is based on through the Torah, right? The Torah that we learn and the Torah that we emanate and the disseminate, and also our davening that we continue as long as our voices are heard in the Batei Midrashot and Batei Knisiyot, then Esav can never control over us. Right? We see from this, both from the Gemara and from the Yalkut Shimoni, that Hashem's love for Bnei Israel is strengthened by the Torah, right? In other words, it's dependent on, if you will, our involvement in Torah, right? If now we can understand, if all the nations try to somehow cancel or somehow stop or eliminate or prevent us from studying Torah, so that we can eliminate the love that Hashem has for us, they can't. Why? And this is a famous thing that we know, and everyone has seen it in some way or another, and we just learned of that. We have heard about it several times in the last couple of weeks and months. As we start hearing from the various hostages that have returned, we start hearing how their ability to continue to love and learn and somehow be involved in Torah and mitzvot, even in these insane situations. And it says, the Zera Shimshon says, if the Jewish people are unable to learn publicly, they'll find a way to study in secret. And we saw that again. We saw the song of they saying how they sing Shalom Aleichem in Arabic, and if they weren't able to study Torah, written Torah, right? They'll learn study. They'll just learn Torah Sheba'al Peh, right? They'll just say things. They'll do things to kind of remind them, right? And then by teaching it, just going over things, the nations of the world won't know or won't identify that the Jews are actually learning Torah, because they'll think that it's just regular talk or regular speech. Classic example is that the dreidel. The dreidel itself was used during the time of the Romans and the Greeks, right? Because what was the whole point of the dreidel was to remind us of mitzvot, and to remind us who the spinning of the dreidel is to remind us that Hashem is above us, and to remind us that there was a Nes Gadol, to remind us of all these different. The whole story of Hanukkah, right? The dreidel is there to teach us that. So using some sort of oral tradition and telling stories and Torah Sheba'al Peh is another way that Bnei Israel will, even if they're under duress, they'll be able to continue to learn. And now the Zera Shimshon gives us an example of how the Jewish people will study even under difficult circumstances. In the last chapter of Pesachim, on Daf Kuf Yud Bet Amud Aleph, it says, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai lamad chamisha dvarim min Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai learned 5 things from Rabbi Akiva when Rabbi Akiva was in Chavush Beit Asurim, when he was imprisoned, right? Even though, of course, during that time the government forbade and made a decree to forbid learning Torah, right? They were unable to stop Rabbi Akiva from teaching the oral Torah, the Torah Sheba'al Peh. V'od matzinu b'Parah kama de Sanhedrin Yud Bet. And we also find another place in the first chapter of Sanhedrin on Daf Yud Bet Amud Aleph, right? Rabbi Akiva himself, when he was in prison, was able to do what? Right? He was about to be sent out to the gallows and condemned to be executed, right? It says Iber Gimel Shanim B'Cholim V'Ayin Sham, right? It says he was able to be Ma'aber the Chodesh, right? And do other calculations, right? And you can look, if you look in that the story there, you can see many of the things that he did were done while he was in prison. Right? He was initially seized because he was making large gatherings to teach Torah, right? And even though he was teaching large gatherings of teaching Torah during the decree, he was still able to do, even in the prison, he was still able to do find ways to teach Torah. So we see from here 2 examples, one from the end of Masechet Pesachim and one from Masechet Sanhedrin, but also other stories. We also know, like I said, we also know stories of this in modern times where people were able to continue learning, able to observe mitzvot, even in times when it's difficult. And even when there was a story now, I just saw a story where there was someone who survived the Nova festival, and he 2 weeks prior he said, I'm going to keep Shabbat. For 2 weeks he kept Shabbat, and then he decided for some reason to go to the Nova festival, and his mother was nervous, and he said to his mother, just like I kept Shabbat for these last 2 weeks, the 3rd week that he was going to keep Shabbat was Simchas Torah, and he said to his mother, just like I kept Shabbat for the last 2 weeks, I'm going to keep Shabbat is going to protect me from this week. And she didn't know, of course, what he was talking about. And he went and he was survived, and now he's a full on Baal Tshuva. There's a story going around. You can see it. Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma, Rabbi Chani ben Tradion, Beper Kama Avodah Zarah. There's another story how in the story there, Rabbi Yochanan ben Kisma rebukes Rabbi Chanina for endangering himself by making large gatherings of teaching Torah. So obviously he gives rebuke for it. But at the end of the day, what do we see? That the continuous, even the Rabbanim and people who in general are willing to put themselves in risk, even during times of decree and times when it's great, they're very dangerous, they're still willing to put themselves at risk. And the nations of the world, and the point here is that the nations of the world can't stop Israel from learning, even in times when they think they can. Now we can understand. Now you can say, now that even that after Jewish people would be exiled, right, among the nations, they would be subject to turmoil, and they'd be confused, and there'd be a lot of distractions. And they'll be very painful. They'll be so distracted of what just happened. They're being sent out to exile or being sent out to other places. They won't be able to learn. That's why it says the rivers, right? They're referring to the oppressive regimes, right? So the nations of the world, it says they're referring to the oppressive regimes. The Chachamim say in Eruvin, Daf Kaf Aleph Lamed Bet, it says, Bo Varecha Kam Al Shoyu Talmidei Chachamim Uskim Torah Mitoch Dochak V'Tzar HaGalut. That scholars who are studying Torah, even under the duress and the pain and the challenges and the confusion of Galut, that shows us that what we're trying to say here is that while the first pasuk of the Midrash teaches us about the idolatrous nations that forbid the story of Torah. The second pasuk that the Midrash brought, the difficulties of the Jewish people will encounter simply by living under foreign regimes. So now we understand why we have great nations and regimes. The great nations are to teach us that even if when the nations create these decrees and try to prevent us or try to break the love between Hashem and Bnei Israel, that's step one. That's one possibility. And obviously the Mayim Rabim, lo yichlu chavot, right? The Mayim, even in great nations, try to wash away the havad, the love and the connection between Hashem and Bnei Israel. So that's not possible, because even when Bnei Israel are under the decree of great nations, or under the power of under somehow being controlled by great nations, Bnei Israel have a way. They find a way whether to learn Torah in great, like we saw from the stories from the Gemara, or even from modern times. And the second thing is Naharot Oshtafua. Why does it? An answer to his question as to why do we mention the Naharot? So the Naharot are regimes that are outside of Eretz Israel potentially, and he's saying is that the Zera Shimshon is that the Midrash brings those because when Bnei Israel are sent out to Galut and we're in these different places and we're confused and uncertain what to do, he says even living under foreign regimes, even there we have stories, and you can see one is from the Gemara of Eruvin Kafal Amud Bet, where we can look, and even when they're living under poverty and in pain, and we see many stories from many over the many years, of hundreds of years and centuries, we see that neither of these of impediments of whether it's great nations that are trying to break the love, or whether we're in situations of galut or situations of decree, either way, Bnei Israel, there's always time, and Bnei Israel always find a way to learn Torah, whether it's Torah of Torah Shebichtav or Torah Shebal Peh. What are we teaching us? They're teaching us that there will never be our ability. There will never be a situation in which Hashem, our ability to learn and ability to continue our relationship and love between Hashem and Bnei Israel will never be abolished or be broken, right? Even in spite of life-threatening situations. Right? And he says, if you look in another, or in Jewish 4, Parshat Bamidbar, there's even more, suggesting more of even that our ability, there's more of a strong connection on how that there suggests that the possibility of the oppressive regime storing Hashem's love of the Jewish people. Basically, what in there, even in Bamidbar, the Drush there and Drush Daled, Zera Shimshon continues to show us how that even there are possibilities of somehow breaking up this bond, or breaking up this love and relationship between Hashem and Bnei Israel. It's impossible to do, and therefore we see this is a beautiful connection between Yasu Kol Chacham Lev. Now, why is it specifically around this pasuk? Right? I think it's mostly about the pasuk, that the idea is the Chacham Lev is a person who's smart and has a heart. And the person who's smart and wise, Chacham, in terms of learning Torah, and Lev connected to Hashem, right? So Hashem's connection to these people and the Mishkan, which is meant to be a place, a dwelling place, where Hashem's presence is felt. So I think this is the idea here, is that's why the Midrash brings it in all together, because otherwise the pasuk doesn't seem necessarily connected to the idea of what the Midrash is bringing. But I think the idea is that the Mishkan is a place where Hashem's dwelling is, his presence resides. And also the Chacham Lev, a person who's really connected to Hashem, is the person who can be part of that and create the place in which Hashem can, presence can reside. And therefore, it's the love, that unbreakable bond between Hashem and Bnei Israel. It starts in the Mishkan and then moves to the Batei Knisiyot and Batei Midrashot, where we learn and continue to learn and daven and perform mitzvot. And those are the places where Hashem says, as long as you're continuing to strengthen that relationship, I'm going to continue to make sure that the nations around us won't be a viable threat to us. So that's Jewish number 10, Jewish number 9. Now we'll continue with if we look at Jewish number Dalet, Jewish 4 in Vayakhel. So this is another person, right? Is right in general. This is the like I said, the Parshat Vayakhel is talking about the craftiness and the talent that was brought around Bnei Israel, who was involved in building the Mishkan, who was involved in helping make the various parts and the various kelim and the various the parochet, etc., and who was involved. So generally, we know that we have to be in control. Our heart has to be. We have to control our desires, control our interests, things like that. Here it says that the Mishkan, it says right. It says right. So the Zera Shimshon, why they can't be led by their hearts. It says Sher Nasal Liban. When you read it literally, it says Nasal Liban. It means their heart was got carried away. right? That doesn't sound like it's a very positive thing. So the Zera Shimshon is about to explain how this doesn't necessarily mean can be taken literally, but rather something that's very positive and turns into something very beautiful. Pasuk, I said, the Zera Shimshon starts in Jewish 4. He says, all the women whose heart led them with wisdom spun these goats. And if you look at Rashi there, it actually says that Rashi mentions there that they actually spun the fleece of the wool from the goats while they were still on the goats. It's an interesting talent. So the Zera Shimshon asks the question, Kasher. Right? It says if it says their hearts led them, it means that they were controlled by their hearts. It means it's something that it's not positive. Right? It shouldn't be something that's understood as positive. How can we understand this as something? Right? Right? He quotes the Kedid B'Yalkut. He quotes the Yalkut Shimoni. Vayomer Hashem El Libo, and Hashem says in his heart. Tzadikim libam b'rshutam. Righteous people are in control of their hearts, meaning that they control the Yetzer Hara. V'arshaim and b'rshut libam. But the evildoers, the people who are Rashaim, are people who let their hearts control them. So according to Zera Shimshon, with his quoting the Yalkut Shimoni, he's trying to show that he says, I don't understand how the pasuk could say that the women were being controlled by letting their hearts control them. It doesn't sound like something very positive. In fact, he would ask, why would the women be described as, in a manner that implies that they're possessed by their heart? It's something that shouldn't be a trait that's to be proud of or flaunted, right? There must be another way to explain this whole pasuk. So he says, it's not possible for the hearts to be under control. They themselves are under the domains of others, right? We already know that the women, and at least in those days, and even today, with the women who are married, right? They have a relationship with their husband, and that relationship means that they're not acting on their own accord. They're working together with someone. Therefore, they're not doing everything by themselves, right? For this reason, they cannot be controlled by their hearts, meaning they cannot be controlled by their Yetzer Hara. Right? If a woman transgresses the law of the Torah, or she just goes out and does things by herself, right? And right? She may be, her husband, in theory, even today, right? A woman who goes off and decides to do things against the Torah. Her husband has all right to say that he doesn't lose it. She can lose it out, and he can divorce her without any retributions. Although today it's a little bit different, but still, the husband has permission to do that without paying the ketubah. Lo timtza right? She will not then find anyone who would marry her. Why? Because she went off her own way. Right? The Gemara in Kedushin in Daf Zayin and Aleph, it says that a woman generally feel that it's better to live as two together, as a married couple, than it is to live alone. So since women want to remain married, they always will feel some sort of connection and responsibility to make sure that they're in agreement with, at least most of the time, with their husband. Right? It says the Gemara in the Yalkut Shimoni says actually, but it says that the woman is exemplary woman. The Chachamim said the exemplary woman is someone who is, follows the will of her husband, at least agrees with her husband. Right? According to this, the Yalkut Shimoni statement is that the righteous control their hearts, but right. We said that evildoers are controlled by their hearts. Right? You can't be referring to these women, because obviously we can understand the reference to in the pasuk to mean that the women whose hearts led them can't be right. If we can't to those who are, we can't be we can't understand that simply as that that they are. Because they are controlled by their hearts, meaning they have a desire to stay married and stay connected to their husband. So this, what the Zera Shimshon says, explains another way. Here the verse is discussing a craft that requires an extraordinary skill. As we said, Rashi explains in the pasuk itself on the Chol Nashim, says that the women had a specific skill, that they were able somehow to spin the fleece while still in the backs of the goats, and then after they spun the fleece, then they would shear the goat, right? So learning craft like this, it's not dependent on a person's willingness to commit himself to it. Right? As he might not be successful. We know because he might not naturally possess the necessary skill. Right, so we know that people are generally have talents, and therefore they continue to lean They lean towards certain skills because they feel like an interest in doing it and they work hard towards doing it. Right? Even if he is in control of his heart, meaning even if he has the most discipline and training, it will not help. Right? So we know that a person has raw talent, and even if he works hard to be a neuroscientist, right? Unless you have the natural skill and natural ability to understand neuroscience or neurophysics, it's going to be very difficult for you to achieve that level of success or that level of understanding because you're naturally born with talent or skills and ability uh, and intelligence that you won't have the ability to learn neuroscience or neurophysics or astrophysics or whatever it may be, right? Some people are just naturally born with a certain talent, and no matter how hard you're going to work to do certain things, you're going to be always find yourself not interested, and it's by default it's going to fall to the wayside. Or you're going to get frustrated. It's going to prove itself to be something that you can't be successful in. But however, a person's heart lends him to lends him to really learn such a craft. Right? He can assume that he's naturally qualified to learn it. And if he wants to put in the effort, right? If your heart really wants to do it so badly, you'll find a way, right? That's the difference between a person who just says, well, I'm interested in being a doctor and I'll learn how to be the medical profession versus my heart is there. And you can see when a person really wants to do something there, you can feel their heart is in the right place. And that's what he's going to say. With regards to this talent, it's with regards to this that the pasuk says that the women whose hearts led them. Meaning, with these words, the Torah is trying to teach us that only those who felt the natural tendency towards the task of weaving these goat hairs undertook it. For if it is often not worthwhile for a person to undertake craft, unless the person is driven by their heart. So it's not that he's literally saying that the heart was in control of them, but rather what the Zera Shimshon is trying to say here is that the women who did this specific unique craft, their heart was the one that was driving them to do this because they realized the greatness and the ability to really take this and put it into a directed towards kedusha. And in fact, the Chovot HaLevavot mentions this idea as well. We look in Shar HaBitachon of the Chovot HaLevavot, chapter 3. We see that a person can determine which talent, which skill, and which career he should take based on the fact his natural tendencies, right? If a person feels naturally attracted to or inclined to be a specific profession, that is the path he should choose, right? In other words, the point is that a person should be working towards something when he feels a natural inclination. He says, my talents are there, right? So a person who's talented and feels that his talents can be used properly and his heart is right in the right place, his heart carries him towards it. And that's what the Zera Shimshon is saying is, it's not that you shouldn't understand it as Nasali Bam. You could understand it, take it as a way that maybe it might be not so positive, that the heart is taking them, lifting them up and they're out of control. I mean, their heart is controlling them in a way that's, according to the Yalkut Shimoni, is not a positive thing. But here, the Zera Shimshon is saying is that these people allowed their heart to take them, that they were so uniquely inspired by this idea of doing something so unique that they were willing to work hard towards it. They were willing to do something, take their talents, and willing to do it for the purpose of the Mishkan. So, B'ezrat Hashem, from the first Torah we did, we should learn the idea that learning Torah and strengthening our relationship with Hashem by learning and through davening and being in places of Torah at all times, because the stronger the Torah we have, the stronger the relationship we have with Hashem, the stronger Hashem's ability to protect us in many ways. And the second one is we have to see that our talents, we should use our talents in the right ways. Well, just like the women did, they used their talents in the right ways for Hashem Shemaim, and their hearts allowed them to inspire them towards doing the right thing, towards doing Avodat Hashem and helping build a Beit HaMikdash. So too, we should channel our hearts towards that kind of service and Avodat Hashem. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.